What a difference a day on the markets can make. Just ask Steinhoff International. The South African retail giant lost billions from its market value on the JSE and in Frankfurt after its CEO Marcus Jooste quit under a cloud. He's being investigated for evading tax, inflating revenues and hiding bad debt. For years, shareholders may have enjoyed fat dividends, but for Steinhoff, the chickens are coming home to roost. It's a story that could have catastrophic consequences for corporates across Africa. But just how did Steinhoff manage to pull a fast one over investors for so long? In this show, we are going to unpack it and try to examine exactly what happened. It's been a tumultuous week for Steinhoff International. These are the quiet offices of the global furniture retailer in Wynberg, Johannesburg. You would never think these offices are connected into what's turning into a global scandal. Just a week ago, Steinhoff was challenging world furniture giants IKEA for dominance. Now, it has all gone to dust. The broad tale could be told through the share price. It collapsed to a record low of 6 Rand, down 80% in 3 days. The shot that set it off was the abrupt departure of its CEO, Marcus Jooste, a South African-born millionaire, until now. This is what the market believes Steinhoff was doing. They set up companies off the balance sheet to obscure losses and inflate earnings. Among them, Campion Capital, controlled by associate of Jooste, Southern View Finance, controlled by South African billionaire Christo Wiese, and Genesis Investment Management, controlled by ex-Steinhoff CEO Siegar Schmidt. Steinhoff's complex balance sheet structure duped most investors, including Byron Lotter, portfolio manager at Vestact in Johannesburg.
What it seems they were doing was they were creating off-balance sheet entities and putting underperforming assets into those entities, even though essentially, Steinhoff was liable for those entities. So for an example, what they seem to have done is when they bought JD Group, they managed to find a buyer for the 10 billion Rand debt book that came along with JD Group. It seemed to be that buyer was one of these off-balance sheet entities that Steinhoff itself actually owned. So they pushed through that debt as a sale and was no longer part of their debt and their liabilities and their issues. It was pushed onto someone else. So that's massive. One of the other issues was, of course, this big argument fight they had with the former JV partner. So what it seemed happened was this guy had sold 60 stores to Poco in 2007. Then Steinhoff came and bought Poco. This guy said he had claimed to 50% of the Poco business because he had sold those stores. He had an option. But Steinhoff then, once they bought Poco, denied this and said, you no longer have 50% of this business. A similar situation happened with the same guy with Conforama. Smaller stake, about 27%, whereby he suggested he still owned or had an option to 27% of Conforama because he actually helped finance the whole deal, which happened in I think it was 2011. And then he started looking at Steinhoff's own books and seeing that they were reporting Conforama as 100% asset of Steinhoff and weren't actually reflecting his option to the business. And of course, investors, these are the kind of things that investors really need to know.
It's a red flag. Businesses who expand at that kind of pace, the move overseas to Frankfurt, the purchase. And what we were finding with Marcus is that he would go for one company, miss it, and then the next day another company, and eventually ended up with a mattress firm. He ended up with Poundland. He ended up with with other smaller businesses all over Europe and in an acquisition down in Australia and so on. And Fifi, when you've analyzed companies over years, it's easy to merge balance sheets. It's very difficult to merge cultures and to merge businesses. And you normally find that somewhere down the line there's an implosion, which we've seen. So I think that was a big warning sign, and that's also a sign just to stay away, take a few deep breaths. It's very, very difficult to expand at that kind of pace without the pain.
And then this was the red flag for you. So
Yeah.
this was the reason why you didn't go rushing into Steinhoff, as a lot of other people did on this market.
Yeah, my sentiments were always expressed. I'm not gloating by far. I'm not at all, but I could never get a grip of the company. I could never get. It was never stable enough to make a comparison. So I could never go back and say, oh, what happened next year? Where are they this year? So the comparatives became superfluous because it was just this moving giant. And for that reason, I said, look, I'm holding back. I'm not going to do it until I understand what the business is. I also found that they were very opportunistic. They would do a deal and then form a structure against it. In other words, say, this is our strategy. And I say, hold on a sec, what is your strategy? The strategy kept changing all the time. It was never stable. So to me, it seemed that a deal came, directors decided to go for it, and then they decided their strategy around it. So that was also a warning sign for me.
There's also been allegations by the German authorities of tax manipulation. The Germans are investigating Steinhoff over this.
One of the things that we've observed from our side was the low tax rate. So, and in the 2016 annual report, Marcus Jooste writes that the tax rate will remain around 15%. Now, if you're a company operating in a 28% tax jurisdiction, how are you able to maintain a 15% tax rate on an annual basis? You are not investing in capital expenditure, which would have allowed you to get tax deductions from the tax authorities, which lowers your tax. You are not doing that. Because you are not doing that, how do you get 15% tax? So that's the first thing that people have to ask. And then one other thing that we looked at was the net asset value of the business was actually negative, and I think I told you the last time, actually negative asset value. So the bulk of the value is sitting in intangibles like goodwill. And so goodwill could be created. So you could basically, I could say I'm buying a chair that is worth 200. If I buy it at 400, the 200 difference is goodwill. So I think there are a lot of things that we still don't know, and I think you can see the reaction in the price. I mean, it's telling you that somebody somewhere knows that the whole is bigger than the 6 billion euros that has been mentioned.
This week, Steinhoff said it could not publish its full-year results because its auditor, Deloitte, refused to sign off on them, raising more alarm bells. When the audit firm was probed about why it did not put ink to paper, it said,
"Due to our client confidentiality obligations, as well as the ongoing investigations, we are unable to comment at this time. All questions should be referred to Steinhoff International Holdings."
One of the unpopular moves that Steinhoff made for some shareholders was to unbundle its African assets. The move was spearheaded by billionaire Visa to create a retail conglomerate for the African continent. But this was not liked by shareholders like Johannesburg-based Zwelakhe Mnguni, Chief Investment Officer at Benguela Global Fund, who wrote to Christo Visa for an explanation.
The biggest issue that we've been raising to Steinhoff and mainly to Dr. Christo Visa, because we've never been a major shareholder in Steinhoff, and what we've always done is we've owned Shoprite. So, and because Dr. Visa was chairman of Shoprite and chairman of Steinhoff, they attempted to get Shoprite to buy Steinhoff Retail Africa, and we resisted it. And the issue was that we couldn't see any synergy between food retail and furniture retail. And so that was the first thing that we raised to them, that why are you trying to do that? The second thing was that the issue of board independence. So I think over time, people become powerful, and it becomes, you get a cult of personality where whatever that person says goes. And I think we felt that because everybody that was around Dr. Christo Visa wouldn't stand up to him, we needed some independence. So we asked him that, can we get, for example, on Shoprite, get an independent chairperson. You're a major shareholder, granted, you've built the business and everything, we acknowledge that, but get an independent person because you've got a vested interest in the business, and sometimes it might be difficult for you to act in the best interest of all shareholders. So you can fight for yourself, but if we have an independent, we would be able to get some balance. And he never responded to that.
In all the confusion, one of the big questions coming out is how on earth the auditors signed off on Steinhoff results for many years before everything came to light.
I think what also seemed to happen, and from the speaking or sort of the what's going around, is Marcus Jooster's character. He was quite a bully. He was very smart. So he managed to convince a lot of people that what he was doing was within the law. Even though it was very complicated, he was convincing. And he managed to convince a lot of people that, he wasn't doing anything untoward. He was just being smart. And with his aggressive, gung-ho type manner, people trusted and believed in him.
Going for a short break. In the second half, we look at the JSE's role in all of this and also look at the damage this has done for one of Africa's richest persons. When things go wrong, it's human nature to play the blame game. Steinhoff's case is no different. Questions have been asked about why its auditors didn't pick up on the holes in its books, why the JSE didn't smell a possible rat, and how billionaire Christo Wiese and the entire Steinhoff board did not know what was going on. In this half, we tackle those questions and we reveal just how damaging this has been for Christo Wiese himself. To the surprise of many, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange did not halt the free fall in Steinhoff shares. It said there was no reason to halt trading or suspend Steinhoff as its primary lister in Frankfurt had not done so. The JSE is the biggest exchange in Africa and is acknowledged to be the best regulated in the world. The question is, what happened?
How does it happen that they didn't pick up on this? And there's been questions around the tax issues at Steinhoff. How did the JSE not pick it up? And I think, the JSE is conflicted in the sense that they get listing fees from Steinhoff, they get all these things. They could have suspended Steinhoff, but they didn't. It's in their best interest to keep Steinhoff listed because they're deriving a fee from that. And I think shareholders need to ask questions around it. That is this a good line of defense? Is the JSE a good line of defense? Or do we need independent structure that looks at the compliance to the JSE rules? Because the rules are there, and if the rules are broken, why are they not taking action? Or how come only the Germans picked up on it and then our authorities didn't pick up on it?
David Shapiro, who has been watching the market for more than 40 years, says suspending Steinhoff would have been in its best interests.
Their future has been set. The share price is falling again, and it's just a matter of time before it's suspended and before the authorities, put it into what I don't know what they call it today, receivership, judicial management. I think it needs that. I would be much happier if they suspended the share, if they took it off the market and gave months to actually analyze and see what's happening there and go into it. And from that we might get value. But at the moment, I'd be very, very nervous if I was a bondholder, even if I was a shareholder.
He also wonders what was going through Wiese's mind during the chaos.
What surprises me more than anything else is that a person like Christo Wiese couldn't pick this up, wouldn't have picked this up. And we don't even know the parties behind who would have set up these structures. But a man with the kind of experience of Christo Wiese, you would have thought that he would have done more investigation before he tied up all his businesses with someone like Marcus Jooster. So there's so many things that we have to know. But the worry is that the market is beginning to say you're not going to get any value out of this. Although, to be fair, somewhere down the line, I still think there's some superb operating businesses that will eventually be bought out and give some kind of a return.
I'm of the opinion that Christo Wiese didn't really know what was going on essentially here. I mean, who in their right mind would go and build what he built with Pepkor and ShopRite, create $1 billion empire, and then put all that wealth into a business where the CEO was cooking the books? It just doesn't make sense. He's an astute, smart guy. He wouldn't purposefully put all his capital at risk with a business that he knew was doing stuff that was illegal. I mean, we've seen accounting frauds in the past completely collapse businesses, so he wouldn't have gone and done that knowing exactly the details of what Jooste was up to.
It's been a very expensive week for Wiese. He lost 2.1 billion rand in one day. His net worth has gone down from nearly 6 billion rand to less than $1 billion.
This is probably the most dramatic that I can remember. There was a guy named Ike Batista in Brazil who at one point was worth $30 billion and then eventually was worth like a negative net worth. But it took a longer time for him to go from those heights to to being less than $1 billion. So I'd say this is the fastest drop that I have seen in the 2 decades that I've been looking at billionaires at Forbes.
And this is a big headache for you at Forbes because right now you're compiling the Africa billionaires list at the moment. You're not sure whether Christo Wiese will be on it.
It was actually, it was pretty funny because just literally 2 nights ago, one of my colleagues had updated Christo Wiese's net worth, and I was looking at it, and I put a note in there saying, wow, his net worth is down $1.7 billion from March. Like, what is that? Is that a mix of currency? Is the stock? What's going on? And then the very next day, his net worth fell another $2.3 billion. That was yesterday. And then today, he's below, and yesterday he was still a billionaire. He was just a poorer billionaire worth $1.4 billion about. And then today he's dropped below $1 billion as this Steinhoff International stock just keeps plummeting.
Ordinary South Africans have also suffered. Millions has been wiped off their pensions. The PIC, which invests on behalf of the public sector, is Steinhoff's second biggest shareholder. And potential losses to workers has got government worried. South Africa's Minister of Finance has called on the PIC and others to investigate the extent of harm done to South Africans. Questions have also been raised about why fund managers like the PIC and Coronation didn't suspect anything.
We should have picked it up a long time ago. I think what it does expose is how superficial our research is. What has surprised me is that, look, first of all, the whole scandal has surprised all of us. No one suspected that the company was as weak as it is and that these things took place. So that is a massive surprise, but it also exposes the depth of the analysis that we do. This was a huge company. This at one stage was capitalized at almost 400 billion rand on the JSE and would have made it to the top 10 companies. Up with Naspers and up with British American Tobacco, those are bigger, but still, from a South African point, a huge business. And yet the way we looked at it was extremely superficial, not keeping touch with the deals that they were doing, the pace of the deals they were doing, and also the structures they were setting up.
But is it fair to lay all the blame at Jooste's feet? Even though Jooste himself allegedly claimed in a letter that no one else knew what was going on.
That letter of Jooste, we already know he's a bit of a scoundrel and was pushing the envelope. So how can you trust what he's saying there? I also find it very difficult to believe that a lot of the executives within there had no idea of what was going on.
Marcus Jooste has taken the fall alone, saying this was all down to him. Can it be down to one man?
No, absolutely not. Of course, there's collusion. There's somebody else who knew it. You can't put these structures up or set these structures up by yourself. That's why I'm surprised at Wiese. That I'm not saying he's involved in any way at all, but that these things were done without his knowledge. And he had a big circle of friends. PSG were involved. Remember that they bought a stake in PSG and sold Steinhoff against it, and it allowed PSG to immigrate their capital by taking an offshore company. You could move your capital out. Yanni Mouton, they're very, very bright men. Surely they could have picked up something. That's for me is the biggest surprise, because a very close circle of businessmen that live in that area. We affectionately call them the Stellenbosch Mafia, but we say it with respect to the businesses that they have built. I think this breaks it all up. This just puts a different kind of perception over that.
For Zwelakhe, there's no doubt about it. The whole board should take the fall.
How could they have not known? Either they were complicit or they were not doing their job properly. And my concern is probably they were not doing their jobs properly, because it's all a buddy system. You go look at the board, it's all people who've worked either together for years and they've known each other for years, and it takes away the ability to question things when things don't make sense, because how are you going to question the things when this person is your best friend and people want to be associated with these billionaires and all these things? So these are some of the issues that shareholders in South Africa and elsewhere in the world need to ask questions about. How do we constitute boards that are able to question and act in our best interest?
So what happens now? Can Steinhoff ever return to its former glory?
Well, there's no doubt that they have liquid big assets. I mean, there's a few stakes in listed businesses that they can go and sell. There's big properties in Europe. There's, of course, their underlying businesses that, as we speak right now, are selling mattresses and furniture and so on. So there is cash coming in, and you can value that. Unfortunately, these things can become self-fulfilling prophecies. As the share prices collapse, their ability to raise capital comes down. Visa might become a forced seller because he's taken a huge amount of debt last year to buy more shares in Steinhoff. So you've got forced sellers coming in, margin calls, and then it just it tumbles down. So there is certainly a risk that we could see a complete collapse here, and then you will get a lot of opportunistic deals coming through where there are assets there with value that other businesses with decent balance sheets can go and buy at 50 cents to the dollar, or maybe even less.
Do you think that they can come out of this the same?
No. Oh, no, not at all. It's now a fire sale, or now we're going to dig amongst the rubble to see what we can pick up. Where I'm very nervous of, and also, Fifi, what you have to understand, what happens if you're a customer of the Steinhoff Group, whether you're a mattress firm in America, whether you're Poundland or Harvey's in the UK, wherever you are, Conforama, etc. You're going to say, hold on a sec, we're not supplying you anymore. I've had a look at your holding company. I know your balance sheet. You want to buy timber from us or something, you pay up front. There's no credit terms, etc. So that's what you find happening. That becomes the difficulty, and that's why companies like this, it's always best to go into receivership or to go into Chapter 11, and that where you've got time to actually save some of the very good operating businesses. What happens if you're working for them as well? You suddenly say, hold on a sec, am I going to have my job next week?
So these offices in the quiet corner of Johannesburg could see large-scale corporate drama continue. Already, people are talking about Steinhoff as Africa's Enron.
There is a tendency to scream and shout at the public sector. I think the private sector has got a lot of issues that it has to deal with, and I think I would call on people like Business Leadership South Africa. What are they doing about it? The unions, what are they doing about it? But more importantly, all shareholders, we need to stand up, and fund management industry, we need to stand up and basically challenge the status quo, because it is unacceptable. How could we lose money on fraud, on audited companies, on companies that are regulated by the stock exchange? How do we lose so much money? So the board, the Institute of Directors needs to also look at this, that what can they do that there are board members who are actually who presided over such a big scandal. The whole private sector needs to come together relook at everything. It happened in America with the Enrons and all this. Maybe this is our Enron moment in South Africa.
Life will certainly never be the same for these offices again. The Steinhoff struggle is going to go down in Africa corporate history. And it's likely to see African corporate ethics on trial before the world. And that's where we wrap up the show. Steinhoff has been the story of this week, but the story is far from over. We will continue to follow the developments of what has been dubbed South Africa's biggest corporate disaster ever. From myself, Vivi Peters, it's bye for now.